gosh. So I had to give a bit of a caveat because I mostly work in areas where data and clients or users are working in health and in government systems. So this is a conference in which I can see in all of the messaging around it and the way that people have been talking so far, they've been talking about the customer as connected and as really quite sophisticated. Whereas a lot of the times that I encounter users, they're in quite vulnerable states or they're dealing with quite serious questions. A lot of them are not particularly young or digitally native. So it's very useful to think about them as a starting point, to think about like how does the internet, how does data, how does the strange environment that we find ourselves living in affect those people that are not necessarily finding that so easy. So it isn't necessarily all wonderful, positive, amazing news, but I hope that it will give you some kind of interesting ideas about the frames that people are using as they try and kind of navigate the digital space and come across ideas and products and things like that. So this is kind of I'm starting from the point that we are weird, squishy mammals who have odd little quirks, who have gone on a very strange journey through a lot of strange spaces, and we find ourselves living with this extraordinarily complex and odd series of rules and data flows and information flows that we don't really understand. Anthropology has obviously a lot to tell us about this. I was talking to people a bit earlier about how a lot of our language has been co-opted. Everyone loves to talk about ethnography these days. It's really fashionable and trendy and cool, as you can see from my big, thick glasses. And I also thought originally about calling this being human online, but of course I'm really talking about the kind of people that are connected to the internet a lot in the West, and that is very specific, and even though it contains a lot of other experiences. So these are quite big oversight ideas, and I hope they're useful to you in some kind of way. We hear a lot of contradictory things about this strange new way of living online. We hear firstly that we are incredibly separated by technology, that our filter bubbles have become more like filter bunkers, that it's incredibly difficult for us to connect with people that don't have exactly the same ideas, that aren't sharing the same news. Of course, the referendum was a great example of that, where a lot of us realized that we simply couldn't hear the viewpoints of people on the other side. We couldn't connect. Our public space has become so divided that we didn't really know how to even have a conversation. But at the same time, we're hearing that privacy doesn't exist anymore, that we can't control the sphere within which our actions have any consequence, or where what we say gets heard. So how is it that we can't speak to our neighbors, but our secrets keep leaking out? How is it that we can do any kind of performing humanity and doing identity in any way that makes sense? And of course, that is an incredibly complicated sort of series of problems, which brings us to the point of why people make the sometimes very strange choices that they do. And theoretical thinking about this is very useful and important, even though you can very cheaply and easily do one of these. Surveys, which will tell you like what and how many and how often, are lovely and cheap. I mean, you might not think that they're cheap, but compared to an ethnography, they are cheap. And we live in a society that prizes very hard, shiny numbers. I've had to sell things to clients in the past, and gosh, a big number headline is handy. But if you can tell someone that you've worked out that a 14.5% discount if they hand over your email is exactly the right number, that doesn't help you predict what they'll do next week. So as with an anthropologist's eye, we try and think about why people are doing things, and why is a very expensive and strange question. It takes often a lot of time, and it can come out quite fluffy. Because if we're trying to think about why people make the choices they do, we have to think about how they understand the space that they're living in. And of course, that looks different to other people. Digital space looks very different to me than it does to my mum. The desert looks very different to an oil prospector, a local hunter, or a web developer on the way to their first Burning Man. And it looks so cool, look at the shimmery. So we know, for instance, that over 90% of people in 2015, so this is not a kind of ancient, what people thought about privacy in the past thing, over 90% of people told Pew that it was very important, or quite important, that they were in control of who could get information about them and what information was collected about them. But those people are still on Facebook. They're still talking about buying drugs in Facebook Messenger. They're still like posting pictures of their kids. They're still on Twitter saying things that will make it hard for them to get a job later. So what are these 90% of people, 93% in the first case and 94% in the second, what are all of these people in this red thing doing? Why are they making these choices? And the only way you can really answer that and think about it is think about, from their perspective, what on earth is going on in these spaces. For instance, what is the cloud? The cloud is in disguise. I like that, anyway. Yeah, laugh at me and my sense of humour, that's fine. So again, lovely surveys. In 2015, we found this great thing that 51% of Americans believe that stormy weather would interfere with the cloud. And not only that, it's hilarious, yeah, but I mean, it was loud last night. I couldn't hear Stranger Things. It was scary. But not only that, and not only do they not know how it works, they also believe that everyone else is lying about how they think it works. So also 54% of them think that other people lie when they're asked whether they know what the cloud means. So they not only don't know it, they believe that no one else knows it, and that it's all a big conspiracy. And 95% of people who say that they're not using the cloud, which is 50% of people, are actually using it because they use online photo storage, shopping, things like that. And that sounds kind of funny, but I work in healthcare a lot of the time, and that involves asking older people what they think about getting their medical records hosted in a place where both their GP and their consultant can access it. And if you call that the cloud, they'll say no, which is terrifying. And like, it's an incredibly difficult thing to work around, because will you put your medical records on the cloud? I wouldn't put it on the cloud, anyone can get there. But you want your GP to get it? Yes. But your consultant? Well, yes, they should easily be able to access that information. Do you share photos? Of course. Do you listen to music? What is Spotify? Oh, yes, I would if I could. All of these things, but can you get your records in an emergency? No. This is also a problem when I start looking at all sorts of things around records. There's now artificial intelligence that's plowing through people's records to work out predictive child protective services. Things like, do you want this information shared or not? What are you willing to sacrifice for safety? But this also this really makes sense, this complete confusion, when you realize that the cloud as a term deliberately obscures the structure of the internet, how it actually works, the metal tubes that run around the earth under the oceans and the things flying in the sky. It is deliberately obscure. Just like privacy policies, none of those 93% people are actually reading privacy policies, because privacy policies are designed not to be read. It would take you about 3 months of your year to read through all the privacy policies of all of the tools that you use. And they are deliberately obscure. For instance, a great expose last week about an app that helps you track your pregnancy, and 3,000 words in tells you that it's going to sell all your data, which is fine, because you get discounts on things, unless you have a miscarriage. And there's no way to contact the people to tell them to stop sending you stuff. So that's why people do stuff like this. They're desperately trying to reach where you are, where the people making the decisions are. They're putting up I herefore the aforementioned own all of my thereby rights and the images, therefore legal digital nonsense, because that's what the space looks like to them. Because really what privacy is not just on-off. It doesn't work like that. This is the sort of Anthropology 101 idea of what privacy is. It's everything. It's about trust, secrecy, risk, danger, lies, control, security, and other words. It's an ongoing performance. It's a series of decisions. So when you get to this kind of point, what I'm disclosing to you tells you everything about who I am. That's how we build relationships, how we become understood by others. Privacy is an ongoing performance about how we perform what we believe to be appropriate within our culture, within the situation. We organize our spaces according to strange rules of privacy. What is normal in one room is very naughty in another one, even if you own both and the front door is locked. And it's not just facts. I don't want my mother to know how filthy a joke I am capable of making. And I don't necessarily want you to know either, because this is being recorded. I don't want my boss to know how seriously I have considered in the past, and probably will in the future, going off and being a theatre producer. Again, I shouldn't have said that on film. It's embarrassing. But every act of disclosure from everything about how you ask how I am today to what I do for a living, is part of a dynamic relationship. I'm making a choice. Do I want to make a funny gag about what I thought I might do once? Or do I want to do something raw and open about how I once thought I could change the world? And then I did anthropology and I realized that everything is so complex. But that's why the transaction model of privacy doesn't work for people, really. If you get 14.5% off your product in exchange for your email, that's okay in that second, but for a human brain, that feels like you've begun a relationship. So when something comes back later that you weren't expecting, that feels like a betrayal of trust. And that is causing a sense of ongoing anxiety, particularly if it doesn't work. Like, there are ways to make that friendly, there are ways to make that optional, to make people feel that they are in control, but unfortunately, the tidal wave of this stuff means that even if it's done well, it can feel unwelcome, and a lot of it is not done well. And that continual sense of relationships that are encoded in this kind of complex way, that are unstable in interview after interview after interview, and all of these issues about how do you want your relationship with the government to work, how do you want your relationship with the police, with health, with everything. People tell me how worried they are, how confusing and distressing it is. If I reveal my travel details to TfL, am I also revealing my affair to Citymapper? You know, my appointment at the mental health clinic or things like that. And you realize that Sainsbury's knows that you're depressed because of all that ice cream. Which isn't necessarily something that you want your colleagues who you are on a shared diet plan with to know. It's funny, but also upsetting. So let's give us a nice big idea to go next to. So this is context collapse. So humans think about relationships and spaces in terms of sort of frames. So I know I'm at a lectern, and I know I should be here. I should perform in a certain way. If I were to sort of run around and try and dive off a plinth and do a gymnastics exercise, that would be entertaining, but it wouldn't be appropriate. We want to perform directly to our grandmother, our partner, our boss, our old school friends, whatever, in very different ways. And that sounds quite simple, but then you think about how now, Donna Boyd has a great example of young black American men from disadvantaged backgrounds trying to apply to college. And they are expected to sort of provide a covering letter and a portfolio and to be Google searched. And they find it impossible to produce the kind of clean-cut, high-achieving identity that the college wants, because their neighbors and their friends and their families have particular expectations of how they're supposed to perform online as well. So that context collapse means that it's very distressing not being able to be the kind of person that you need to be in different situations. Of course, it matters in this kind of case if you are from a conservative family and Facebook tells you that you've been to a gay pride event. And if all of these people have different kinds of expectations of you, then it's very hard to perform to change yourself or to make serious decisions about what you're going to do next. There are issues of leaky identities is another side of context collapse, where the profiles and the systems and the platforms on which we live right now are made up of other people's choices a lot of the time. Some of them very inappropriate, like every time you invite me on LinkedIn. Every time, it's never appropriate. So our profiles begin to blur. Like I get a lot of friends, I get a lot of work from my Twitter profile. My Facebook profile is made up of the different things that people have decided to tag me in. And because I never tag myself in photos, it looks like I'm either always at a wedding or clubbing. That's literally all I do. And that idea of leaky identities is quite a profound shift. In the West, sort of building on from the Enlightenment, we think of selves as very individual things, with selves with individual rights, individual responsibilities and choices, including the choice to fail. If you fuck up in the West, you're kind of expected to deal with it. Whereas there are a lot of other ways to think about identity, to think about the family unit as, say, the legal as the place where legal operations is, which is, as in the past, manifested in the context of the patriarchy, with men owning their wives and children as property in quite a lot of, barely over a century ago, and also in places where, say, ideas of strength as the head of the family is manifested in the purity of one's daughters. So that can be tied up, but that blurriness is also can also have positive effects in that you fail this time, that's okay. You're going to be supported by the family. If you were chucked out on the street, if you were expected to succeed alone, that would be shameful for the rest of us because we support each other. So as my life moves online onto lots of different platforms, I begin to be much more aware that everything I do has an effect on someone else's identity, on their choices. I'm making their freaking email inbox really annoying with this stuff. Or I'm deciding to promote what they're saying and with a nice comment, lots of emojis and hearts saying gosh, this article that they wrote is really great. So this is actually becoming quite firmly entrenched in places like in China with Sesame Credit, where they have decided there is a platform on which you get credit, like a clout score, but for everything, including your politics, which doesn't just measure your career progression, your political affiliation, your success in your social media profile, but also those of your friends and family, which means that you are strongly encouraged to cut off that cousin that keeps posting rants about the fact that there is pollution in the water or that a school has collapsed, in order for you to get that 14.5% off your car rental or find it easier and quicker to get a visa to Singapore. So these ideas that, the worries that people have, although they might be profound and uncanny and strange, they're actually rooted in, there's a genuine worry that these things are going to affect their lives in future. Leaky identities and context collapse and not understanding the world that they're in make it very hard for us to make choices about our lives. I talked about auto-completion. This is genuinely what came up in a slightly more academic talk I was giving, with lots more syllables. But yeah, Google doesn't want me to write about dystopias. Everything is good in Google Docs. Everything. The world is wonderful. So the terrors that are underlying these things, when they worry about privacy, it's not just about embarrassment, about being shown up, but about working out what you can do next. People really want to be able to design their own lives, to be able to perform identities in complex and skilled and fun ways. That's what we do as humans. I decide to entertain the person sitting next to me at a conference, or I decide to be kind of, professional and austere at work, or to look very, very intelligent at an academic conference by talking about technological solutionism. All of those are decisions, and that's the entire enjoyment of being human and being alive, I believe. And some of these things, they seem quite quirky and and abstract if you were born in a life that began well. If you were born healthy, if you went to a good school, if your parents were educated or at least not abusive, if you contended with less issues of discrimination, of snap judgments, from parents or teachers or employers or police due to your ethnicity, your religion, your sexuality, your gender or your disability or your class. But an auto-completed life for one person where things began well is very different from someone whose life didn't and who might want to change the expectations of them. And all of these issues of relationships opening up that you don't understand where they're going, they feel like hooks and roots that are pulling you down and keeping you into a marketing friendly box that lets you know who you are now. But what if you want to change and you want to use those relationships to create something new and exciting about yourself and a new kind of future? And until you kind of address that deep need and that concern, you're going to keep getting people reacting in ways that you don't understand, who are going to worry about their health records, about their relationship with government, and suddenly sort of abandoning a shopping cart or getting extremely annoyed about an advert that seems to tell them something about you reading something very private about them. Their anxiety is going to manifest in ways that are very, very difficult to work with. So if you respect people, they can give you wonderful things, and you can end up with, obviously, the perfect product, like Amazon, which knows exactly what I want, but won't give it to me. You torture Amazon. You tease. So it hurts me. I mean, that's the point that I want to end on. The idea is that I want to create a wonderful, daft, and intellectual world where I get to drink anthropology wine that has been created by an algorithm. But that is only available if the people that I work with and the people that are creating that world allow me that kind of freedom and don't make it currently unavailable. So yes, that at 10 seconds to go, I told you that I would run under, is a series of ideas about what it is to be human in this strange, awkward digital space and to try and be daft and creative there. Thank you very much.